Welcome, everyone, to Coffee with a Codex. My name is Dot Porter. I am a curator in the Schoenberg Institute for Manuscript Studies, which is in the Kislak Center for Special Collections, Rare Books, and Manuscripts in the University of Pennsylvania Libraries. The Schoenberg Institute, or SIMS as we call it, is a research and development institute focused on manuscript studies. We do a lot of different stuff. We have a lot, particularly digital projects, but we also have some pretty great physical collections. And so once a week, I get on Zoom and I show a book to you. This is, if you've been here before, welcome back. If this is your first time, welcome. This is pretty informal. So if you have questions as I'm going along or you want to contribute something, go ahead and put them in the chat. My colleague Amy Hutchins is here. Amy is our co-host and she is the manuscripts cataloging librarian. So she knows these manuscripts really well and she can answer questions and I'll answer questions. We'll look at the book. And today I am very pleased to be showing you MS Codex 1566. MS Codex 1566 is a late 14th century book of hours. And if you know me, I may have talked to you about books of hours before. I used to not care for books of hours. I thought that books of hours were really fancy and only things that art historians would ever be interested. I am not an art historian. I am really interested in books as objects, particularly. But a few years ago, I did a research project on books of hours, and I discovered that they are actually really, really cool. So I'm excited to talk to you about this one. So I said it's late 14th century, so between 1375 and 1399 is when we think it was made. The binding, however, is the record calls it a modern binding. So this is probably 19th or maybe 20th century. It's velvet over like a thick cardboard. It's very nice. I think of it as, I call it the Muppet binding. Can I say that? Because it is sort of soft and nice. And it's very small. You can see it's very small. So books of hours were personal prayer books. So this is the kind of book that someone may have actually carried with them, and the small size is sort of an indication of this. There, it's got this nice clasp on the side. Again, this is a modern clasp. And you can see that the edges of the book, I hope you can see that. Actually, today I brought a light with me because we've had issues in the past with sort of being able to see colors and things without a good lighting. The edges have been gilded, which means that there's gold paint that's been sort of painted on them. That is not actually something that you see really in the Middle Ages. So I'm pretty sure that that was done when this binding, probably when this binding was put on. That's my guess. So this was a maybe 19th century person who thought it would be really neat to bring this book up to date. So we'll open it up and we'll take a look. It was made in Metz, which is in France. So it's a French, but not near Paris. So lots of books of hours are sort of Paris books of hours. This is not Paris. This is Metz. It is not probably the fanciest book of hours you have ever seen in your life, if you've seen other ones. But it does the job. So it opens up with a calendar, which is what we expect books of hours to open with. So what's a book of hours? A book of hours, as I said, it's a kind of personal prayer book. But they are, and one of the things that I think is really interesting about them is that as a genre, there's a lot of things that you expect to see in a book of hours. And if you see a book like this and you open it up and you look at it, you can say, yes, this is a book of hours. One of the things is you expect to see it opening with a calendar. And then one of the other things you expect to see is the hours of the Virgin. And we'll get to the hours of the Virgin because this book of hours has one. A calendar, it's a little bit different from a modern calendar. In that what it is doing, I've seen it described as a map of the church year. So what it's doing is every day although not every day has an entry. What we're doing is we're looking at what are the holidays and what are the saints' days that we're celebrating on these particular days. So we're in January, and we have in both red and blue these entries, which are going to be different saints. Here's Saint Felix here. I'm not sure who Saint Felix is, but he's here. So if this was your book of hours on this day, you would look at that and maybe say a prayer to Saint Felix. And these were personalized, and also we use calendars to figure out both when and where these books were made. So in this example, let me check the record here. So the calendar includes Saint Arnulf and Saint Clement, both of whom were bishops of Metz. So they are later, so we're in March. It says that Arnulf is in October. Here's September, October. So here is October, and here is Saint Arnulf right there. I'm pretty sure that's him. And so, well, he's a bishop of Metz. Where are they going to have, who else cares? Maybe a lot of people cared that he was a bishop of Metz, but certainly Metz. So that's one way that we can say we're pretty sure that this was Metz. And St. Clement is in November. So it's on the front and the back. St. Clement's right there. So we know now that this is probably Metz. Another way that we are pretty sure that it's Metz is because of this miniature right here. So the calendar is over, and now we're moving into the Hours of the Virgin. And most of this book, this is a very small book of hours. Some books of hours have lots and lots of prayers and things, lots of things in it. This one is relatively small. We have the calendar, we have the Hours of the Virgin, we have the Penitential Psalms, the Litany, and then the Office of the Dead. And that's the whole book. So that's like, as books of hours go, that's actually pretty basic. It has all the basic things that you need to make a book of hours. So the opening of the Hours of the Virgin is always going to have some kind of illumination or miniature that has Mary and Jesus. And in Metz, apparently it was sort of typical to have this breastfeeding imagery in this illumination, which is the only place that I've ever seen it before, actually, is in this manuscript. I understand it was in other Metz manuscripts, but here we have that. So that's a nice opening, and it gives you a sense of the kind of decoration that we're seeing here, which is there's gold, and so it is, I guess you could say it's a little bit blingy. When I move it, one of the great things about doing the video is that I can move it, and you can see it. And and yes, and as Amy points out in the chat, she's sitting on the moon, and you can see the face of the moon there, which is a little bit weird, but there you go. Oops, that's not, it's trying, there we go. So there's the face of the moon there. So this is a very Metz sort of thing. So there's gold and it's nice, but it isn't incredibly well done. I don't want to insult it because I love it a lot, but it's doing its best, I guess we can say. So there's a little more illumination here, and then most of the pages look like this, where we get the alternating. If you've been here before, I like to talk about my alternating initials. We have, in this case, gold initials with blue and pink surroundings, and it goes back and forth between sort of pink or red on the outside and blue on the inside, and then blue on the outside and pink and red on the inside. And maybe this is where light will sort of help show those colors a little bit better. There we go. So I want to make sure to show all of the miniatures here. So I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. So the hours of the Virgin take their organization from the canonical hours. So it's basically the way that people who lived in monasteries, so monks or nuns, organized their days, had these series of canonical hours, and what the hours of the Virgin and other hours, there are other sort of sets of prayers that are described as hours, but what they're doing is they're dividing the day up in the same kind of way. And you may have heard of them. So the hours are matins, which is the earliest in the day, and then lauds, prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, and compline, which is sort of very, very late at night. So basically every few hours you're stopping to pray. And the hours of the Virgin is the same organization, and takes it for what we would call a lay audience or a secular audience. So the first miniature we saw was the opening of matins. And now we're moving on to lauds, which would have been another sort of early morning office. And let's see, this is the arrest of Christ. So we've gone from Christ as the child being nursed to Christ being arrested. And we have here he is being kissed by Judas. We have the knights here, who are the soldiers who are going to take him away. People who know more about the Bible than I do. I think that's Peter. He's getting ready to pull his sword out, and I think someone gets an ear cut off. I'm not sure, but that's what is happening in this. So it's this illustration of this life of part of the life of Christ where he's getting arrested. And again, this is lauds. So next we're going to go to prime, and I'll take a few minutes to go through because there are some larger initials here. Oh, there we go. There. Lauds. Oh, here's a little hole in the parchment. Another sign that it isn't really the highest quality, because in a very, very fine manuscript, you would not see a hole. There would not be a hole in the parchment like that. They wouldn't use parchment that had holes. All right, so now this is 46 recto. That is the front of the leaf, is the recto of the leaf. And now we're at prime. And this is Christ before Caiaphas. So he's been arrested. He's standing before the judge. You can see that the judge, and this is something you see a lot, people were not shy about interacting with the illustrations in here. So someone has actually come and sort of scratched out his face. You can see that's probably purposeful. That's saying, we don't like this guy, so we do that. You also sometimes see miniatures or illuminations of Jesus where where his face is sort of messed up. And that's usually because he's been kissed or rubbed with your fingers. So it's two different ways of interacting with it than that. So Karen in the chat says the writing itself is better than the illumination and decoration. I think you're not wrong. The writing is really is a very nice example of sort of Gothic. You know, when you think of like Gothic writing, like this is it. And it's not actually that hard to read, although because of the style, it's got the minim minims, which is those up and down lines, which is what sort of the letters are made of. But you can still, with a little bit of training, you can see it's pretty easy to read as the style of writing goes. But yeah, and it would have been written by a different person than the person who did the art, and maybe multiple people actually could have had their hands on it. So you might have multiple scribes, and you might have several different people doing the artwork as well. Yes, Amy says, though, looking at the feet of the M's, you can see it's not the most formal writing either. The feet of the M's, yeah, you're a little bit. It's like they brought the quill down and sort of went whoop. Not super careful. Yeah. Okay, Colin asks, I may have missed it from previous coffees, but what is the makeup of the ink? It stood up so well for centuries. So the ink, the black ink it's probably, I think these are usually iron gall, but I am not an ink expert. Amy's sort of peering. I don't know if she has any idea either. It's really hard to tell what any of the sort of ink, like gold is pretty easy to tell that it's gold. But without actually doing analysis of it, I am actually really hesitant to identify anything in particular. So that. But there's definitely a lot of gold, which is, yeah. Matilda says often oak gall plus or minus iron. I think whenever I think of ink, it's usually iron gall ink. Oh, and Amy has dropped in the chat a post. Is that the post? That's the post about making iron gall ink, how to make it. Yeah, we had a guest post a while back on how to make iron gall ink, so you can read about that. Okay, so now we move on, and we are at Terce, and this is the scourging of Christ. So he's been arrested, and now he is been tied to a pole, and he is being scourged. So we're heading towards the crucifixion and then onward. Let's see. So every day, if you can imagine, if you were saying prayers every day, you would be reminded of the life of Christ over the course of every day. And here we have the Christ carrying the cross. And this might be one of the nicest one, because look at the background, the red with the gold painted decoration. This is a really a very nice one, and he's there. That's Mary, and I'm not sure who else was with him, but there he is doing that. This might even be a different. I am not an art historian, but this is really nice. This one, the thing that I feel like the outer decorations, like the marginal ones, are not quite as nice. So that might have been a different artist. Okay, and this is Sext, and now we are heading towards Known. And Known, I think, would have been, I think Sext was like noontime, and Known would be, sort of 3 in the afternoon. And we have the crucifixion here. We have Mary and the saints, and this is another. We've got the blue background with the gold painting there. And I want to say that, didn't Christ die? He died in the afternoon. And now I'm wondering if the timing, the fact that his crucifixion appears here at Known isn't coincidental. Okay, Joyce is asking me to zoom in on the faces, and I'll zoom in a little bit more so we can see the faces. Let's see, can we get closer than that? And hello, can we be, there we go. I think that might be the best that we're getting. So there are faces on them, and they look more or less realistic. We're not at a time period when faces look super realistic, but they usually, you can often, especially when they're well done, you can see emotions on them. I think artists are artists no matter when they're doing their art. There we go. And as Amy mentions, the book, you may have noticed, it's been trimmed, which means that the margins are smaller now than they used to be. It would have been slightly bigger, and it would have been trimmed when it was rebound, and it may have been because it's in this sort of quote unquote modern binding, doesn't mean that it was taken out of the original binding and put in the modern binding. It's actually very likely that it was rebound, one or more times. It's impossible to say without actually taking the book apart and sort of looking at how many stitching holes there are. And of course, stitching holes, that is the holes that were made in the parchment to attach it to the binding, could have been reused. So this book could have been rebound a few times before it was put in this binding. Okay, so that was known, and now we're heading towards Vespers, which is just a couple more. Come on, one more. Here we go. Vespers is 70 recto, and we have the descent from the cross. So he's coming off the cross, coming down. And here, I mentioned earlier that sometimes Jesus will be a little bit messy or look like he was rubbed. It looks almost like that is what's happened here. If you see, there's no ink here in the center. And I think it's likely that the person who was praying with this book either rubbed or kissed or both that spot, and that's why there's no ink there. So I wouldn't even call this vandalism. This is a sign of use of prayerfulness and this interaction with the book itself that's intimate and I think really interesting. If you're interested in that, if you think that sounds really neat, check out Kate Rudy. Kate Rudy has written, she's a manuscript scholar at the University of St. Andrews in Scotland, and she has done a lot of work on this. And she's a very good writer, so her writing is I think really accessible, even if you're not a manuscript scholar. She tries really hard to be accessible. And a lot of her books are in open access, so they're actually free to read. So this is Vespers. So we're getting towards bedtime. And next we're going to be at Compline. Just a few pages. Here we go. So Compline, and we have the entombment of Christ. So he's being put in the tomb and getting ready to go in the tomb. And then what happens next is going to be, let's see, the Penitential Psalms. So this is actually the last book of the Hours of the Virgin. So we're moving away from the Hours, and we're going to the Penitential Psalms, which are, I believe they're the Psalms that, King David, the story is that King David wrote these Psalms when he was being extremely penitent, and so they often appear in books of hours. And so here we have Christ in majesty, and this is a typical scene. We have Christ. He's got his fingers held up in this prayer sign. He's holding the earth in his hands. His feet are sticking out from under his robe, and he is now alive and God and that. So let's see. So then the next thing that we're going to see, well, the next section is the litany, which begins on 107. So here's where the litany, but we don't have a miniature for litany. It just sort of goes right into it, although we do have this nice initial. And then the last section, and it's good because we're almost out of time, the last section is the Office of the Dead. The Office of the Dead is not it's not like a funeral service. It's like remembering the dead, praying for the dead. And this was I think in most books of hours, you're going to see the Office of the Dead because it's this sort of constant remembering of the saints and people in our lives who have died. And in the Middle Ages, death was everywhere. You had wars and you had sickness and you had lots of people dying all the time. It was something that was sort of constant. And so they had this rite of sort of remembering the dead, and so that's there. And I'm putting this here just so you can see a little bit better. The scene is usually it's sort of a funeral scene, although this does not look like a funeral scene. We have a couple of priests at what I think is an altar, and then people wearing black behind them, which they might be monks. I don't know. That's a sort of interesting scene because it might be that they are to represent the dead, who, but I don't really know. But I've always sort of been fond of this one because of those the figures in black sort of lurking there in the background. It's a little ominous, which I like. And then this is the last section, is the Office of the Dead, and you can see it's a big chunk, so that's a pretty substantial set of prayers all on its own. And this is the MS Codex 1566, the most basic book of hours, but really delightful and clearly one that was well used both when it was made and afterwards, because it was somebody cared about it enough to put it in this lovely binding. And I notice that it's broken here. If you see here, the binding itself is kind of broken, which implies to me that after it was put in this binding, there was somebody who was very attached to this particular opening, which is kind of interesting there. Oh, is this the catchword you're talking about, Amy? Yeah, there's a catchword here. Does that actually? That does not actually. That doesn't match up with this. So I think there's something missing. There's something missing here. So maybe that's why it's broken here, because somebody pulled out a choir, which is less romantic than what I was thinking. I'm unhappy now, and now I'm kind of curious as to what that might have been. What are we missing? I don't know. All right, it is 12:30. Thank you all so much for joining me through my little walk with MS Codex 1566. And we'll be back next week to look finally at the one that we were going to look at last week. And then in 2 weeks, we'll be back to looking at astronomy because I just love astronomy, and I'm going to keep looking at astronomy manuscripts. So thanks, everybody, and I'll see you next week.